17 minutes. I'm going to go in and put a pot of coffee on. When it's done, we got to get back in the trailer. We got to get out of here. So we're not going back in the dark. And they said, fine. And I go up into the house. And as I'm unlocking the door, I'm going to go in. I look over there. She's got the book. And she's doing this. And everybody around her, they're looking up, listening to whatever she was telling them about that tower. I always remember that picture in my mind. I go inside, get the coffee on. I use the bathroom. And I go upstairs around the house, checking all the windows, because it's wind-driven rain coming down. And when I come back out, they're not out in front of the tower anymore. Her whole family's up on the porch out of the wind and rain. And I'm looking over and I'm scanning. Mr. Ellison, where's your wife? And he doesn't say a word. He grabs my wrist. He pulls me to the corner over here, and he points. That old dead tree, she's standing out there all by herself. She got that. She got a little hoodie on now. She's got the book in her arm. All that green water and those white caps out there. And her standing there on the shoreline, staring out there. It was quite a picture. And I always regretted since not walking out there, because it occurred to me later. She's out there remembering a story she heard as a little girl about a lighthouse on an island from the man whose job it was to keep it lit. What did I miss out on by not walking out there? You know, what she might have shared with me, that'll kind of always haunt me. And it occurred to me later, too, the only lights that man would have seen from this island at night in 1885 would have been the lights on wooden ships out there, and knowing while you're here that there's men out there on those ships in the dark, and they're dependent on guys like you to keep that tower lit. I realized later that that was a lot of responsibility for such a young man, and it occurred to me he sure must have taken that responsibility seriously, because after I had a little time to think about it, I realized he sure left an impression on one little girl who 70 years later is out here remembering him and remembering his memory. And I could just see her with that book in her arms out there. She was having a conversation with him, I just bet. I bet she was saying, I'm here, Grandpa. I made it. I brought the book. Had to be a very proud moment for her to be out there. And so anyway, she got back over here. It seemed too rude not to offer, so I said, did you guys want to see the house real quick before we go? Oh yeah, she wants to see the house. And I said, fine, okay. I dropped the trailer. We got them all up on the porch. And as I go through, I decided real quick, I'm gonna start out with the tour. I'll go down in the basement. And all the young people are filing down in the basement. Mr. Ellison's still helping her up the last set of stairs on the porch. And I wait, and as he comes into the living room there where you guys all went in, I'm standing in front of the basement door, and I'm pointing, this is where we're going. And he gives me the okay. And I run down there, and right away, one of her sons, the attorney, he asked me about how I make electricity in those batteries down there. And I'm explaining it to him, and I know over my shoulder now, Mr. and Mrs. Ellison have made it to the base of the stairs, because we all heard the same thing. It was a very emotional sound. It was a sob. And I turned and I looked, and she's standing there. Her husband's holding her arm. Her other hand is on this old limestone wall. It's right where it's always been, the stairs. And there's that old limestone wall, and she's staring at it. It's a very emotional moment for you. You could just feel it. And everybody's quiet. We're watching her. And finally she said, with her hand on that wall, she said, he has seen this very wall every night he came down to get the oil. My God, she's right. They did. That's where they kept the oil. It was in the basement. I had never thought about that before. She saw that old limestone wall, and it must have kind of hit her. A memory came right back and flooded into her mind about him talking about going down in the basement, and it was a very emotional moment for her. And I know it affected her boys, because as I'm waiting to finish our little talk, we're going upstairs. I'm waiting to turn the light off as two of her boys walk by. I watch them reach out and put their hand on that old limestone wall, right where she had the hand. And I think, like her, trying to just make that connection with their great-grandfather, the light keeper. And I've never seen that same wall since, the same every since. I got him back. I got warm thank yous and a hug from Mrs. Ellison. So much for taking me out there. Didn't have much choice. Her husband kind of bullied me into it. I pulled her son off to the side and said, hey, listen, I know we're never going to get this old book away from your mother, but if you could get it to a law office long enough to get it on a scanner and then open it up and scan that inside cover where that young man in 1885 took the time, after he finished reading the book that night, to write his name, dated it, Charity Island. I'd love to have those images. I think people might enjoy seeing this, you know. And 2 days later, I got them in an email, and I felt so lucky to get them. And now they're out there on a permanent little billboard, vinyl billboard out there, people walking us through here. And sometimes I sit out there and I wonder, as people are sitting there reading this little story, you know, did that young man in 1885 out here all these long, lonely hours, did he ever imagine someday 125 years later, somebody be out here sharing a little slice of his life story. Probably not, you know. Anyway, so I thought that was a great story. In the next few weekends, as I'm telling my usual bit, I started including a little bit about Mrs. Ellison and her grandfather, William L. Pierce, you know. And I could see that people, it really kind of made a difference in the trip to be able to share these personal stories. And I'm wondering, what else is out there that I don't know about? What other story can I use to enhance the value of my trip out here? And I can't believe that winter, as I'm looking for stories like this, I come across the story in the New York Times. The New York Times, because a 140-foot wooden steamboat has gone missing with 46 people. Nobody knows where it's at. It left Oscoda, Michigan, on its way to Alpena on a December day, late in the afternoon, going out on the Great Lakes in December. It's almost dark. And they're going out there, and there's no such thing as marine radios. There's no such thing as radios yet, but that's the life they live. And the ship ended up missing. It never arrived in Alpena. And the storm comes through. They're in a blinding winter gale snowstorm. Everybody's fearing the worst. And a young man, crew member, ends up over in Caseville. And the story gets out that the Econo is wrecked off of Charity Island. And when the story gets out there, it ends up in the New York Times. I thought, wow, Charity Island ends up in the New York Times. Hasn't happened in my lifetime. And it says that there's no lives lost, but the Econo was wrecked off of Charity Island. It says they left at 4 in the afternoon, fully loaded on the bottom deck. Now, a 140-foot wooden steamboat is from this hand railing here all the way over to my deck. And the ship is 35 feet wide. This deck is only 24 feet wide. So I have 11 more feet out there. Picture this area full of cows and horses, the old wooden steamboat. There's these people on board. This thing takes off. And as soon as they're underway, within an hour, all the snow and the rain is coming down and the waves are building and they're getting pounded so bad, he said that the cows and horses are breaking loose. Many of them are being tossed so violently they've got broken legs. Captain wants everybody on the starboard side because as they're going north, the starboard side's taking the pounding from the waves. Busted open the doors as the ship is slamming into it. Pretty soon all the live crates of live chickens up on top in their lifeboats. They're going down so deep into these troughs, before they come back up, waves are washing over the top of this thing, and all the lifeboats are gone. The live poultry is gone. And he said finally the captain's worried, after hours of battling the storm, they're not going to make it to Alpena. The ship might break apart. He decides the only safe thing to do now is turn it around in the snowstorm, run with the wind and the waves at their back till they see the Tawas Point light. And once they see that light, then all they got to do is make a hard turn to starboard, and that should put them in the sheltered waters of Tawas Bay. He said finally at midnight, the captain sees the Tawas Point light, gives the order to start to turn the ship. And then he realizes, holy cow, that's not the Tawas Point light, that's the Charity Island light. It means one thing, we're in dangerous water here. And before he can react, the crew member says they hit a reef so hard, he said that we immediately went for the life jackets and getting them to the women with children. And the crew, we just started preparing ourselves for the icy bath. We knew that none of us were going to survive for more than 15 minutes. We learned that we're not taking on water with the engines off. This ship is not moving. They must have carried a wave right up on top of them. Boom, they're on this reef. He said they just prayed all night with the waves pounding against this thing and the ice and snow building up. The ship would hold together. He said in the morning light, they looked toward the lighthouse. They saw the lightkeeper and his assistant. They're pushing off, and they're rowing out there. They spend all day in this gale, rowing a mile offshore, getting people on in this lifeboat, bringing them back, unloading them, going back and forth all day long. He said they put the women with children up at the lighthouse. There were a bunch of fishing huts on the south end of the island where the men were put, and there's plenty of food because we've got dead livestock in the hold of this ship. So they got warm blankets and they got food. He said the night he came out of the engine compartment to help with all the other duties, he saw the galley. There was a blazing fire in the wood stove, and he thought, holy cow, the embers are going to roll out and start the ship on fire. As he goes in there to secure the doors, he sees the cook is laying there and moaning, and by the time he gets over to him, the man has died. He thinks of fright because it's such a terrible storm. Everybody's so terrified. The cook couldn't take it, and they ended up burying him on Charity Island. And I thought, wow, pretty amazing, lengthy kind of story. What do you do with this, you know? And I'm like getting close to springtime, trying to assemble my notes. There's a dinner cruise being planned, the first one of the season. Where's all those notes about the history of Charity Island? And I'm going through them. And as I'm going through them, some people had said stuff. I told other people about the cook dying. They buried him on the island, the Sakanto thing. And I went back to try and make sure I got my dates right. Yeah, it left on... holy cow! It left on December 4th at 4 o'clock in the afternoon in 1885. That is impossible, isn't it? It says right here in the morning light, we see the lightkeeper and his assistant. My hand's kind of shaking, and I'm clicking with the mouse. I'm trying to find my other file. There it is, and I pull it up. There's the first part of the file. It's the cover of that old book, and I click the next click, and I open it up, and I can't wait to see the date. Am I right? December 4th, 1885. Holy cow! This story about the Econo in the morning light, we see the lightkeeper and his assistant. That's William Pierce. That's the only man it can be. The assistant lightkeeper in there. He got his name in the New York Times. And I was like, holy cow, I can't believe what a coincidence this is. The two stories I've got, and it's got him in there. And I felt, it was just an amazing moment. I had chills in my back. I went, this man, and I'm like, almost like I'm standing on the beach, and I'm going, I know who you are. You're William Pierce. Your granddaughter made it out here, mister. She told me all about you. You came out here. You're 18 years old. In fact, you brought this book. I know, here you're out there rowing in this gale, and I know you just finished reading the book by Jules Verne last night, and you signed inside. I mean, it just seems so amazing. When I went to my wife, I said, Karen, you won't believe this. Look at the Econo, New York Times story, and the morning light. Look at the assistant lightkeeper with the lightkeeper. I said, look, right here. There it is. There it is. Look at December 4th, 1885. She goes, oh, my God. She goes, you're right, it is. I guess it's a good thing you listened to me that day. I said, get off the couch, those people might be out there waiting for you. Oh, there it is, yeah. I love her a lot. Some days it's easier than others, but so anyway, the reason I wanted to go through that whole story because it was an amazing coincidence. Don't you agree? Yes. It was, right? Well, the fact is, what happened with the Econo wasn't uncommon because today they refer to the Great Lakes back then. That was the superhighway of what was that fast, young, growing nation, the United States of America. They often describe the shipping traffic out there literally as bumper to bumper. And what happened that night with the Econo, now picture this. The lightkeepers in the morning, the wind's blowing, they see the ship out there, it's dinging the bell, you know. And we got to go help, and so they take off. What would have happened if they'd have capsized in that freezing water and they would have drowned out there? Who's going to keep the light lit for the next ships coming through the next night? Could be a real problem, right? Chain reaction? I think that's what they were thinking. So they decide they need more men out here, to, a couple of them at least, to be trained and ready to row out, help mariners when they're getting in trouble. So they're going to need a bigger house. So they take the one-room, one-story dwelling off the foundation. They're going to build a taller, two-story, four-bedroom house. Oh, it's two. Oh, look at that. It's yeah, that's great. What do you call it? Panavision. I don't know. So they're going to build a two-story, four-bedroom house, and they take the first old house off the foundation. They're going to actually.
That'll help.
Forget us.
Okay, so they dig the foundation out, and the original foundation they actually add 2.5 feet of brick, and then they take brick and they build a brick cistern down in the basement of this house. And now when the rain runs off the roof, it's going to be down in the basement underneath the kitchen. They got a hand pump at the kitchen sink, and the men won't have to carry the water up from the lake anymore. And they get this two-story, four-bedroom house built. Now there's a problem. The house is so tall next to the 39-foot light tower, the house is blocking the light for ships that are coming around the thumb. But it was the federal government involved, so I'm sure they anticipated that in advance. Sure. I have to say that because, you know, the federal government owns part of the island now. So now they got to raise the tower. When you go out there today and look, you see the first 30-some feet of that tower. Under the old faded white paint, it's a red brick. But the last